Welcome to our show today. My name is Douglas Gabriel. I'm with my friend John Barnwell, and we are going to talk about the deeper secrets of the Guardian of the Threshold. Welcome to the show, John.
Well, hello again. And it's good to clear the air, so to speak, because this is really a difficult subject when actually the real difficulty lies in being a human being.
There, that's the bottom line there. Now, what is a human being? Man, is that a complicated answer? Because you have to give the entire cosmology. As a matter of fact, we have in some books presented what we call the biography of the I Am. And if you can understand the I Am, you need to know that there's physical and spiritual parts.
Yeah, it's kind of like this, and so what is this? Well, it shows you all the various modalities in which we're exposed and coming out of a few hundred years ago, that image, but that these things have been there for time, from time immemorial, but we are now in modern times. And so what's needed is an approach, a fresh approach. These things have to be recast in every time period. And so if you talk about the golden chain of Homer, for example, well, what is that? Well, it's the same thing we've been talking about all along, that there's this chain of seven conditions of consciousness that go through each seven conditions of life, that go through each seven conditions of form. And so if one can use that as kind of a trestle board to mount your ideas and keep track of many of the things that we share with you, well, you're better off. But somebody else might not have that tendency, and they'd be better off reading a Goethe's fairy tale of the lily and the green snake, which essentially, archetypally, it's all there. You don't need to be complicated to figure these things out, but there are people that have a natural tendency to want to.
Yeah, so many of these things can happen quite naturally. You don't have to put any effort into it because why? You're just following the simple path of piety, the simple path of purity. But, you mentioned what is the I Am, or, what is the human being? Well, in the ancient Egypt times, when they went to sleep, they'd meet the lesser guardian of the threshold as the Sphinx. But Steiner would say they'd meet it as if it was at a distance. And as we know, the Oedipus question, and the Sphinx question is basically, what is the human being, both in, youth, middle age, and old age, as well as what are the four beasts of the of Revelation, the angel, the lion, the bull, and which one did I miss? And the eagle. So when we're looking at this, the Sphinx used to represent what the Egyptians, because they didn't really have a highly developed ego, an I Am, a waking day consciousness, and an ability to think freely. So they would see the Sphinx, and what would they be seeing? That's the mystery of what a human being is. But they really couldn't answer that question. What is the mystery of the human being? And then when they would die, they would see their soul weighed upon the scale against a feather. And it needed to be lighter than a feather to go into one realm. John can tell us the names of these realms and the goddesses who watch over them. And that the heart, the ib, isn't it the IB? The heart is the thing that is actually weighed against the feather. Well, that's what happens when the great heroes of the Greeks or the Mesopotamians went into the underworld. They had to give up at the river of Styx, at the river of death, to Charon. I think that's how you pronounce it, Charnaron. You have to give to him, you'd have to open your mouth, and he'd have to take a coin from it. Well, what is that? That's your moral development. And if you get there and you don't have a coin, you're not getting across. And he might suspect that you are alive. So the heroes had to trick him, and trick the three-headed dog into believing that they possibly could be dead, and or they're not going to harm this underworld. And so you have to have the coin upon your tongue. I think they even had that tradition in many, many different religions and mythologies, or the coins on the eyes or the coins in the mouth when you bury someone. So you have to have the moral value to be awake when you cross the river Styx, and you have to have the fairy help you. You can't do it yourself. That's karma. That's destiny. You don't create the moment of your death, or if you do, you should be very sorry about what happens to you afterwards. And you can't stick your hand in the river Styx. And when you get across there, you have to do something to feed the dog. Well, the way that you feed the dog is have no fear. And as John said, the dog, Cerberus, is there to keep the dead in as well as keep the living out. And that's exactly what the threshold does. And then when you go into the underworld, then you're going to be judged again. Are you going to eat or drink? Because if you do, you stay there. You can't eat and drink of that kingdom. You can't participate in the underworld without paying the debt that comes from that. And so the heroes would make sure not to eat or drink when they were down there. They were often given foreknowledge of that by some wise person. So they didn't. And then they could come back. For instance, Psyche came back to give to Aphrodite what was it called? It's the beauty that was on the face of Persephone when she's in the underworld. There's a special name for it, but it's kind of like despair, but sleep, or unconscious sleep. And so she puts it in a box and brings it back. And so when you go to the underworld, what is it that you're going there for? It's to bring back the understanding that the shades live there for a while, but that the human being is eternal. And that judgment is not just going to be, Michael with the scales and the sword and the spear conquering the dragon. It's not just going to be St. Peter at the pearly gates. It's not going to be Santa Claus with his book saying you've been a good boy, you've been a bad boy. It's written into the Akashic records.
Yes, and it reminds me of a humorous, a joke actually. Individual, he passes away and he goes up and there's the Archangel Michael there to meet him, and he's taking him down this hallway, and they look and there's all these side rooms. And so there's the Methodists, or here's the Baptists, and he's going through all the denominations, and they finally get to a door and the door is closed. And he says, well, who's in there? He says, oh, that's the Catholics. They think they're the only ones up here. It's an old joke, but it typifies a story in that the mystery of death, which is the greater guardian, the threshold, and Douglas in our previous part, the first part of this, he talked about how when one has the true experience, that one comes back changed, that you've been able to divest yourself of certain burdens, and you've changed your whole perspective on the world. And I just go back always to the oldest story I remember from my family, from my grandma, from my mom, from my aunts. They all would tell this story about my great grandfather, John Finn, who passed away, and he was like a big builder. He built most of the Catholic schools and churches, and he built the cathedral, and he built Henry Ford's first assembly line factory, and on and on and on. He was a big deal, and he passed away, and Henry Ford and Horace Dodge and all these people are at the funeral. And it's not a funeral, it's the wake. He's Irish, right? And so he lays in state. He's up in his bedroom, laying in the bed, deceased. And Father Solanus, his mentor, shows up and goes upstairs by himself. And he's up there for 5 minutes. And then you hear down the stairs, get me some water. And he came back from the dead. And this crusty, serious old Catholic business guy, he becomes this gentle soul and he lived out the remainder of his life with that kind of that regained countenance, that humanness that he had perhaps lost touch with while he was a successful businessman. And so from my earliest childhood, I always wondered about that. Gee, he went on the other side and then he came back. It's like, and then later on in life, I popped out of my body and ended up on the ceiling. So to me, it's very clear. It's a matter of my personal biography makes it very easy for me to look towards these types of ideas. There are those of you out there that perhaps you haven't had experiences that are kindred to my experiences or Dr. Gabriel's or Tyler's, and that's okay too, because all we are asking for is that there's a healthy suspension of disbelief and an attempt to try and understand the things that we say and find out what we thought we meant.
But don't try these things at home. I went to Egypt and went into the Great Pyramid. There was no one else in the Great Pyramid. Long story, but I laid down in the sepulcher. There's a camera there. So I said, "Hi, I'm an American. I'm not going to hurt anything. I'm just going to lie in the sepulcher." I laid in the sepulcher, wasn't there 10 seconds. Boom! Pulled across the threshold with an explosion. There are places that can actually create that. There are these, as I said, doorways. There are thresholds. There are places that are so holy, so spiritual, and or that they have physically been created. They've just noticed that above the space station is noticing that there are these strange new types of never seen before atomic ionic particles being emanated right above the Great Pyramid up into the atmosphere. So, anybody who tells you they know everything, they don't, because new things are discovered every single day. So this is about being human. This is about when you want to become an angel. What are you going to have to do? Rudolf Steiner pointed out that you must meet the threshold being. Call it what you want. Call it also the Lord of Karma, because it's the Lord of Karma that causes you to be unconscious while you're asleep, in dreamless sleep, dreams, or even trance consciousness, or causes you to have to go through Kama Loka and relive your life after death. So this Lord of Karma is Christ now. So in the past, the Lord of Karma for the Egyptian might have been, what was the god who weighed the feather? I forget what his name.
Well, Thoth or
Thoth.
Hermes.
Or either one, yes, Thoth or Hermes. So for them, that's who it was. In the past, they would see the Archangel Michael as the being who, after death, would weigh your soul and then determine whether you can go see St. Peter and get through the gates. And then now, though, after the mystery of Golgotha, it's Christ who's the Lord of Karma. But he's also the lesser and greater guardian. But he has also helpers at the lesser and greater guardian position there at the threshold. Some would say that you meet Michael as you're going to sleep, and you meet Sophia as you're waking up as the lesser guardian, the two sides, like two sides of a coin. Some would say that, of course, you're going to meet the guardian of the threshold when you die, and then you're going to go through 3 days of living your life backward, as we talked about before. Once you get pulled across the threshold by drugs, by accident, by trauma, by initiation, transcendence, all the things that can get you across the threshold. If you're not ready for it, you're not going to bring back any moral content from your experience. But if you are ready for it, then you're talking about having direct communion with the spiritual world. So the point of the guardian of the threshold is to get you to be so aware of what's going on in your body that you can feed the angels and the angels can feed you. And that's a very specific process. So somebody complained the other day because we mentioned something about eating meat and, calling anyone who eats meat a vampire and a monster. And they've now proven, and they record, this just came out in the last couple of weeks, and now it's happening all over the world. They record a plant being eaten and it screams. Okay. So if you think for 1 minute that, the animal us eating animals or animals eating plants or plants basically being created out of minerals. That's all part of a symbiotic food chain. And the Steiner says that when let's say that you're facing the guardian of the threshold and you're actually having very high spiritual thoughts, the angels come and actually angels and archangels come and they chew on you. They chew on that food that you're giving them, what you would give to Sophia as an advancement in your spiritual development. Each step, she is there. She is the midwife of your spiritual development, allowing you to become part of the Holy Spirit. So there are helpers at the threshold, but the ultimate threshold being is now Christ. He rules death. He has conquered death, and he's allowed the template of his I am that he has donated to us as an Elohim, but he's of course higher than that. And basically what he's saying is, you've conquered death. Now, when you come to the threshold, I'm going to push back. I'm going to tell you what you need to work on before you try to come over here, because otherwise you're going to sink the boat and you're going to sink into the river Styx. And that's a really bad thing. They described it, and it's really nasty what happens if you stick your hand or anything in the river Styx, right? And this is true with the Finnish myths of the Swan of Tuonela and the as you mentioned, the Inanna and Ishtar, all of these things, Psyche, Eros and Psyche, all of them, Hercules, Orpheus, Aeneas, all of them. It's the same exact process. They go into the underworld for a reason. And what is it usually? To redeem their higher spiritual self. Mercury went after Persephone to bring her up initially. These heroes go down to basically get something special, something spiritual, and bring it up. Well, that's what we're doing every time we say, I'm going to now sit down and meditate. I'm going to cross the threshold consciously. Or when I go to sleep, I'm going to cross the threshold consciously by clearing my conscious beforehand. Or before I die, I'm going to make sure I don't have any loose ends. I'm going to clear up all the bad stuff I did so that basically I save the spiritual world, taking that content from the Akashic record and replaying it for us until we get it right.
Yes, you could take the story of Heracles. Many people say it Hercules, but Heracles, showing the relationship to the goddess Hera. But there's the 12 labors of Heracles. And the last labor of Heracles is meeting the Cerberus, the three-headed dog. Again, it's that whole idea of being able to pass the threshold because one has conquered oneself within the realm of thinking, feeling, and will. And it's all of that. And that is what is going to ennoble your constitution so that you become worthy of being able to attain your citizenship, so to speak, in the heavenly realm. And so it's kind of funny because, you know, if you take your ordinary Christian dialogue, they get into talking about sin and that there's all this sin and you want to do this to clean yourself of sins and all. That's all well and good, but what does that word mean? The word sin is translated from a word that really means to miss the mark. So you didn't find the center. You're always trying to go to the center of the puzzle. If you keep going to the center, because that's where Christ dwells, that's the indwelling presence in your heart, that if you can work towards that indwelling, then you find that the scaffold of the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 labors of Heracles that surround the heart, the chakra, that it's a 12-petaled lotus, and 6 of the petals you've worked on in previous incarnations, and 6 you're specifically working on right now. And so you have this whole idea that were you clairvoyant at this point, you would look, if you looked in a mirror and you saw your aura, it would be all kinds of chaos and murky colors and flashes of color through it because of fits of anger or what have you. And that what happens is when one follows the guidelines given by Rudolf Steiner in primarily knowledge of higher worlds and its attainment, and also the section applied to it in occult science and outline. And all throughout his work, he gives you indications to whereby you can come to a relationship to where you are conscious of your destiny as a human being. And so that's a marvelous legacy that I hope you will avail yourself. But as far as to look at the body of work that Douglas and I have been working on here, you could see that as kind of like a bit of a roadmap, in that what we've done is we've pointed out, we do short excerpts from various lectures of Rudolf Steiner, because nobody can explain it better than him, but they're dispersed over 6,000, well over 6,000 lectures and 50 published articles and books. And so it's difficult to research an individual topic. So we've grouped them together and made it easier. And if you want to go deeper, well, the full reference is there, and with the collected works number, the GA number, and the date, and the place, and the title that it was used at one time, because a lot of times they change the title, so it's good to have the date, and so that you can go deeper into any one of the aspects of Rudolf Steiner's work that we've brought out to present to you. So these are meant to be guidebooks through the world of anthroposophy or spiritual science.
Yes, this book we've created, Facing Your Double, The Dweller at the Threshold, Facing Your Double. It is basically a handbook of initiation. And when you think of Steiner's work from the very beginning in Knowledge of Higher Worlds, and with the book John described, Theosophy, Knowledge of Higher Worlds basically says, listen, there is something beyond the threshold. And in Knowledge of Higher Worlds, he has these conversations between the aspirant and the guardian. So he not only describes it objectively, he gives you characterizations as if you are there standing talking to this being, and this being answers you. And so the explanation goes much deeper than just a description. It is a characterization that is what you will experience in one way or another, but similar to this, when you meet these beings. And so if you want knowledge of higher worlds, and you want to see auras and chakras like John was just talking about, and you want to see this, witness the spirit in one way or the other and cross that threshold in the spiritual world, then you basically follow the advice of who is the guardian of the threshold, what does that being or beings have to do with me, and how is it that I can be benefited by working with that being. So Knowledge of Higher Worlds, Occult Science, Stages of Higher Knowledge, Secrets of the Threshold, the mystery drama, Secrets of the Threshold, and the other things that we put in this book from other lectures that Steiner gave are absolutely the most complete compendium of descriptions and characterizations of meeting the guardian of the threshold, because it is part of initiation. And there's much else that basically fills in the pictures and the characterizations he gives from other lectures. And he always does it from a different point of view, as John pointed out. When he gave the book Theosophy, it was from him on the other side of the threshold speaking about those worlds. And who can do that? Who can go into the Akashic record and give you a complete topology, a roadmap to the whole thing, coherently, pretty much from the very beginning that he started teaching Theosophy, and 1903, 1904, and basically summarize all of ancient mystery wisdom, all of the mystery schools, all of the religions, the mythologies, the histories, the legends, the parables, the fables, the fairy tales. That's what anthroposophy is. And what it does is it shows you who a human being is in all of its manifestations. So as you're reading Steiner about these topics, sometimes it gets a little bit dicey. It gets a little bit scary. And you say, well, I'm not sure I really want to do that. That's true. Some people don't want to be initiated. They don't want to face the threshold. They don't want to face their own personal shame, and they don't want to face their own personal fear. But from these selections, you have here, as John has pointed out, what would take you a very long time to derive and put into one place in an order that when you read it, it makes sense. Now, we didn't just go to Steiner. We went to the Theosophists. We went to John Bunyan and Pilgrim's Progress. We went to any place that we could find descriptions of the dweller and the threshold, and we give you the different views of it, because some of these views are very strange, but we need to present them so you'll understand them. For instance, during Blavatsky's time, there was a great debate about the guardian of the threshold, and they said that the guardian, or the double, so they confused the words, guardian, threshold, dweller of the threshold, the angel of the presence, and the double and the doppelganger. And they would say the double is that part of a very evil person that continues to exist after their death and stays around near the surface of the earth independently from the reincarnating ego of the being it came from. In other words, a ghost, a shell. And so here you get this confusion. The doppelganger is not a ghost. It's very real, but it's kind of the ghosts and specters from your own personal past that you have yet to resolve. And basically, then the Lord of Karma has to mitigate all of that from incarnation to incarnation. Let's say that I killed somebody 3 incarnations ago and I have never forgiven them and they've never forgiven me. And so I keep reincarnating with them and having horrible problems with them. Who do you think has to carry all of that from life to life? That is Christ, the Lord of Karma. And so basically, you're doing Christ a great favor to unravel the Gordian knot of your own bad karma. And you're doing Christ and Sophia and all the hierarchies of favor when you can work with your good karma and you don't have to be hindered. You can be unburdened from the past because you have been forgiven and you have forgiven others and they have forgiven you. That's why the one prayer Christ gave says that we should forgive others as we forgive us the way that we forgive others. So this is what we're working with here. And so we have basically pointed out that in all aspects of anthroposophy, you need to or will, in fact, deal with this guardian of the threshold. Now, Steiner created all kinds of impulses, and I mentioned that he created the High School of Spiritual Science with the first class, a second class, a third class. First class was never finished, 19 lessons, and it is all about the guardian of the threshold. We'll come back to that. But he also created the Christian community, and in certain rituals of the Christian community, he uses what's called the tableau. He also helped create the Camp Hill movement with Karl Koenig and others. And they use in their reverse cultist ritual the same tableau. Now, I have to explain this because I'm going to read that tableau for you in a minute. And it supposedly was the same exact words that any initiate would have experienced when they got to the doorway of a mystery initiation temple. For instance, at Delphi, at the Temple of Delphi, above the door, it said, I always hear it in German. It says, "O man," or "O human, know yourself, and you will know the gods and the world." I may have that backwards. Could be the world and the gods. Anyway, the point is, before you go in through this threshold door into the mystery initiation symbol, it says, "O man, know thyself." Well, what does the guardian say? Exactly that. And points the finger right at you with all of the Akashic records supporting the fact when they say, "You've been a bad boy, Douglas, and there's nothing you can do because it's you pointing at yourself, essentially. It's what you wrote into the Akashic records, and it won't be resolved until the karma is balanced." So there are, in the first class and in other Christian community, Camp Hill movement, and other places that Steiner used mantric verses to help you understand who the guardian of the threshold is. Now, the penultimate expression of anthroposophy could be called the foundation stone meditation, but others would say, yes, but it's also the first class of the high school of spiritual science. So they shorten it to first class. So in this first class, they have these mantras, and the mantras are supposed to be secret. The tableau is not secret, and the lectures given about the mantras are not secret. We never made vows that we wouldn't give those out. So I'm not going to read to you the mantras that are the secret mantras, because in every one of Steiner's sections of the Anthroposophical Society, he gave special, secret, guarded, well-guarded verses for teachers, for people studying natural science, for people studying Bella Letters, people studying social science. He gave certain meditations. Well, these are the meditations for his inner students, those who, in many cases, were part of his esoteric school, which went on for many years, or part of what was called the cognitive cult, which was a type of transformed Freemasonry, or any other of the higher wisdom that Steiner ever gave. So in the first class, you have the secret of secrets. So when I said this is the deeper secrets of the Guardian of the Threshold, you can read Steiner's lectures called The Secrets of the Threshold. You can read what he characterizes as the secrets of the threshold in his mystery drama. And you can read all of his other stuff, and you'll come up with almost the same exact content, but you will not have the mantric verses. And so the mantric verses, I highly recommend when you get to the point that you say, yes, I'm serious about initiation. I'm fearless. I'm ready to look at my shame, my fear, my hatred, my doubt, all my vices. I'm ready to look at all of them. Then you want to study Rudolf Steiner's first class. Now, this is taking a long introduction. I'm sorry, but it takes this long. Those were secret before. We used to have to write them down, handwrite them in a book that we promised to send back to Dornoch, the headquarters of the Anthroposophic Society internationally, upon our death. And we had to swear a vow that we would not share this with anyone who wasn't a member. But what you wrote down was only the mantras. No one ever in those days, early days, got the lectures. Only the first class reader, the one person who could read German also, usually, and then they would read to you this lecture. There were a minimum of 19 of them, 19 lectures, and then some repeats. But these lectures are the most profound thing in all of anthroposophy. These lectures are absolutely exactly what an initiate needs to be able to recognize the environment and the topology of entering into the spiritual world, the spirit land. So we used to, you had to be invited into this group. And if you weren't invited, you didn't even know it existed. It was that secret. And if you ever gave a lecture on anthroposophy, this was beautiful. Someone would walk up to you, and they knew who was a member of the first class. And if you weren't, they would say, what gives you the authority to speak about anthroposophy? Now, if your answer was, I'm a first class member, here's my card, then you were cool. But if you didn't have that, they didn't allow you to speak about anthroposophy in public. But they also didn't tell you this group exists. They never told you how to get in the group. And you didn't know the group existed. And yet it has the deepest secrets in all of anthroposophy. And certainly the secrets that a true initiate who's a cosmologist needs to or wants to know so that they can have a cognitive image of what it is we're talking about in terms of what is the human being. So in all the mystery schools, they had these mantric verses. And in Tibetan Buddhism, these are the rituals and empowerments that you see. There are thousands and thousands of them. And they have mantras in every case. And those mantras cause certain things to happen in your body. And they also cause breathing. And they also cause tonation. So you have to intone Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. It has to be in that tone. It has to be in that rhythm. Or everybody else chanting Om Mani Padme Hum, it's not going to work. It'll work to focus your mind, but it won't do the magic that is created there. So Steiner said these mantric verses were basically directly given from the spiritual world, and that they had this power to help transform you. So his deeper secrets are for his deeper students who entered into the first class. Now, these things have been printed. All of them, the mantras, the lectures, all of it, all been printed. 3-4 different versions that I've seen. And so people say the vows no longer matter. But the vows do matter to me because I practiced this for many years. It's just like there's certain secret mantras I know from Vajrayogini practices I can't share with people. If I did, it would lessen the power they have over me and to help me. It wouldn't hurt you to hear them. You wouldn't even know what they were. So there are these mantras. So I'm going to read the one that is appropriate for what we're talking about. And this is part of the tableau, so it isn't secret. Know first the earnest guardian. He stands before the gate of spirit land, denying entry to thy senses' power and to thy might of intellect. Because in all thy senses' life and in thy weaving of thoughts, from the spirit emptiness of space, from time's delusive powers, thou first must find with conquering strength true being of thy being. So it gives you a flavor of these things, but trust me, the mantras are amazing. And when you read them along with the lectures where they were embedded, they are some of the most powerful things ever. This is one version of it. Okay. These are sometimes hard to find. This is in 3 volumes, but there are other ones. Some officially given out by the Anthroposophical Society in Dornoch, others by T.H. Meyer and other people. But basically, they're all going to read fairly much the same, even though the translations are a bit different. But if you really want to know the dweller on the threshold, you cannot get anything more explicit in any other writings that we have been able to find than in the first class lessons and the mantras.
Absolutely. And so in coming to understand these things, a great burden is lifted on the student, because perhaps for their whole life, they've been told about like that there's this permanent hell, if you don't get it right, you go to permanent hell. That caused probably more people to walk away from the church than anything else. It's like, well, no, that can't be true. So they walk away. Maybe they remained as nominal Christians, but they couldn't take the matter seriously. But it doesn't resonate because occultly speaking, it's not true. That there is this whole idea of that there's the metamorphosis of worlds. So the different worlds they go through, as they go through the Maha Manvantara, it goes through periods of rest, right? And that's called pralaya. But after the Maha Manvantara, there is a Maha Pralaya. So there's an even deeper level at which there's this cosmic rest. And then a new beginning goes forth as mirrored through the first logos to the second logos to the third logos. So that is the process of the developmental cycle of this universe in which we live. And so if one can take up with all humility the realization that you are a part of a divine plan, and if you can honor that by reflecting on it in your actions, your thought, word, and deed, that it's going to align you with that. Whereas there are beings out there that have denied, and in every cycle there are the beings, there are the denying beings, but you have to even respect the denying beings because they give you something to press against. They give you something to make the distinctions that will help you to provide yourself with an understanding of what love is. Because love, just as fear is absence of love, well, love is the removal of all fear. And so when you can really think on these things on a deep level, it becomes transformative. And so the chakras, they can begin to move. And when they begin to move, then you find that clarity that can lead you into the next world in a wholesome way, but still requiring, again, facing that dweller on the threshold and being able to confront your own shortcomings and failures and humbly overcome the shame and the fear to be a servant of the divine plan.
So true. And what you just said reminds me of the fact that we have to give a warning here. Many people have approached the threshold, and because they were sensitive and they were in perhaps a state of trauma or other such sensitive states, they freaked out and they end up in psych wards. And in some cases, like I mentioned earlier, they think they're Jesus Christ reincarnated, and they're 100% convinced of this. You know how many Jesus Christs I've met in the psych wards? I can't tell you how many, because once you get into the spiritual world, you realize that you and this higher being, Christ, are one and the same. You're created from that template. And so you get confused. And this is the problem. This is where the clarity is needed. That's why Steiner says 3 steps in moral development for every spiritual step you take. And so when he created the first class, this stuff is so serious, even though it's barely any other content that he didn't already talk about. I'm going to talk about some of the content of the first class here because it's in many lectures. But the point is that this is so serious that if he thought that you were doing it wrong and he looked at you and you were doing it wrong, he'd kick you out and you didn't get to hear the rest of them and you didn't get to participate, and you had to turn the mantras back into the first class reader. So there are people who face the threshold and end up literally with psychotic disorders. But, you know, when I worked with Father William and I'd go into the psych ward, I related to all those people. It was like, yeah, I've been there. I know that. I know what you're feeling. And guess what? Embrace that. Love it. If I could get them to look me in the face and realize I'm another being, and that the being that they're seeing, they think is a monster, which is really them. And so they go back in their body for a second, and then they understand, hug this demon that you're afraid of like you're hugging me now. In some cases, boom, that was it. They're out of the psych ward. Because why? They become objective about who they are, and they stopped hallucinating about the fact that who they are was on the outside of them, coming at them, revealing who they are to them, and that freaked them out. But that's where your I am comes from. Your I am comes in one stage from the outside, from what other people tell you. You only know who you are through other people, what they tell you, or what you do with other people. So if, you know, you get to that point, so there's the warning. If you get to that point where it's terrifying, then just back off and do a lot of work on what's called mantrayana or sutrayana mantrayana, which is prayers, devotion, fasting, and meditation and contemplation, concentration, these kind of things. And don't be worried about it. But if you are one of these warriors for Sophia, if you are one of the soldiers of Christ and you really want to do, you want to get there as quick as you can, which we all will get there. This will happen to everyone. Everyone will be able to see the guardian clear as day when they go to sleep and when they die in the future, far future. But right now, it's kind of terrifying and many people can't do that. So there's a warning that we have to give you there, that this is very serious stuff. And Steiner took it very seriously, and he only allowed certain people to enter into the first class, and then he didn't finish it. And why didn't he finish it? Because there weren't the results. He didn't see that the people in the first class had the results they should have had for him to go on. So he did repeat lessons of some of them and went a little bit deeper in the lectures. But in terms of the mantras, he didn't go beyond that. Same thing happened with Blavatsky. She had 19 lessons in the Esoteric lessons class, the secret of the secret Theosophists. It's funny that they both had 19, isn't it? But then in the end, she was so disappointed because there weren't the results. And that's the point. If you actually do this, it's just like meditation. If you walk up to someone who does a lot of meditation, you see it in them. It's in their aura. It's in their way it's in their demeanor. It's in the look on their face. And when you walk up to people who are evil, who are dodging the threshold, they're turning more into animals. They look more like animals. They walk and talk and act like animals. And this is the bifurcation of humanity that happens at this time. So we are in a pseudo end times. In other words, we have the chance to have everything end now if things go really bad. So we're seeing the war of all against all, and that appears on people's physiognomy, according to Rudolf Steiner. So as you have to have compassion for people who, come back and tell you crazy Luciferic things. I just had someone making a remark on the YouTube about, he's all that and more. And all I have to do is ask. And why am I so stupid? And why did I get it all wrong? Why did Steiner get it wrong? And, who are we to say anything when he is the person who knows? You know how common that is in a psych ward? It's unbelievably common. And in every single case that I know of, in every single case of psychotic people, sociopaths, and I've seen a lot of them, they have trouble sleeping and they're scared to death to cross the threshold. So they don't go to sleep. Sometimes they become insomniacs. Sometimes they just have night terrors, but they have problems sleeping. And if you say to one of those people, and they're in a cognizant mood, you're going to die, they freak out. They don't want to think about death, and they don't want to think about going into the spiritual world whatsoever.
Well, yes, I mean, you can, another reference that we can give is in the book, The Transcendental Universe by C.G. Harrison. He tells a story about an individual that he helped cross the threshold, but they had insufficient preparation, and it created really an unbalanced result. And all it amounted in was C.G. Harrison say, "Well, I'll never do that again." It's like, because he could show a person how to get across, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a good thing. He, of course, hadn't really processed the stage of the aspirant that was being showed the way. And so that's what Rudolf Steiner was so careful about. He didn't want to create imbalanced states of mind. The whole idea is that even though anthroposophy as a whole, spiritual science, that with your current state of mind of the modern human being, that it's perfectly possible for you to come to an understanding of the spiritual scientific contents and the supersensible realities that are characterized within anthroposophy. But would you be able to have constructed it with that kind of a mind? No. But unfortunately, you don't have to, because there is a Rudolf Steiner, and there's a tremendous record of what he was able to give on your behalf. And so it's our hope that we have somehow made it easier for people to come and approach the works of Rudolf Steiner through all these volumes that we've done thus far, and there's more to come. And so this has been a more than fascinating journey for myself, and for Douglas, and for Tyler, and for everybody out there, I assume.
Unwholesome experiences. Let me describe that. You see, how many of you have been to a seance? Well, I'm a clairvoyant. I went to many seances. And if they were hip, then the spirits on the other side would start talking to me using my spiritual name and always refer to me as this certain name, which is always a crack up to me. Because why? You're talking to dead shells. That's called a double. That is the shell of somebody who is not so nice. And you're trying to reach them with a seance. What you're going to get is their shell. And their shell doesn't evolve. And you can actually get information that they knew in that life. I've done this where I talk to shells. And the shell told, because the woman didn't know where the husband had kept the money. And she knew that it was there in the house. And so she asked me to come out. I do all kinds of crazy things like this. So I'd go over and I'd feel around, I don't feel it. Let's just ask your husband where it is. Oh, your husband says it's under the floorboard in the garage back in his workroom. Oh, okay. And you go there and you dig it up. And so, oh, did I talk to a dead person? No, I talked to the shell of the dead person. Right.
Yeah. The shell is that's kind of like your overcoat that you've cast aside, and it still has kind of the effusions from you, but it's not you. You've moved on, but yet it contains records that pertain to that incarnation.
But so many people want to get across the threshold to talk to their loved ones. Now, what is it in most cases that I've dealt with that they want to know? It's really silly. And then they'll lose all their faith because they want to have a confirmation from the spiritual world that their husband or their wife is there and they're okay. And before they died, they decided that if they hear this little tune, that means they're still alive on the other side. And so when they don't hear that tune, and when the seance doesn't bring that out, and when the psychic doesn't tell them that, then they give up. There's no spiritual world. That's how materialistic people try to take materialistic thoughts and apply them in the spiritual world. They just don't apply. So in a seance, you're not talking to dead people. The dead people are now going through their life backwards very quickly. And then they're going through a kama loka where they go through it all again from the perspective of everyone that they had interactions with. And then they go through the spheres. Well, you tell me when they died, I can tell you where they're at. I can go there and ask them a question. Okay. But they can't give an answer. When you're in your dreams or when you're dead, you don't have willpower. You are subject to what you have already done. You are seeing a replay. You're seeing basically an Akashic videotape with good sound and really good visuals. But you are there when you're experiencing this yourself. When the guardian, through your three nasty selves, and in Steiner's first class, he gives descriptions of these beings, and they're scary. And no matter how many times you hear them, you go, "Oh man, I don't want to see that being. I don't want to. I never want to meet that being." Okay, well, here's three beautiful descriptions of it. And then when you enter, let's remember, it's like entering into a seance. What happens when all of a sudden there's table tapping, tut, 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 or somebody's as tapping on their glasses and they're tapped right off their head, right during a seance, or during, trying to contact the spiritual world, or during using a Ouija board when when that little thing that moves around flies across the room, or, does crazy things, what is that? That's because we don't belong there in this form. So when you got to the Mystery Initiation Temple, when you get to the Guardian of the Threshold, you're going to have an experience. And the experience is going to be, get ready to be upside down, backwards, and inside out. Because until you can be comfortable knowing that your three natures, your thinking, feeling, and willing, are going to be pulled apart, and that if you don't have a strong ego based upon Christ, you're going to experience the abyss. You're going to experience the bottomless pit, a void, falling. And that's what people are so afraid of. Falling is cool because then you learn to fly. But until you have that attitude, it's a terrifying thing. So when you got to the gates of the Mystery Initiation Temple, they sounded forth some words. And those words got you prepared to have a super sensible experience on the other side. And what did you learn on the other side? Who you are. Some of the mysteries of the Eleusinian mysteries, the Greek Eleusinian or Eleusinian mysteries, is that, lo and behold, the moon reflects the sun. At that point, that was shockingly unbelievable, because what were they saying? Then we are like the moon and we reflect the sun. Now, they didn't get that. You talk to a scientist, they'll say, "Oh, they're so stupid. They didn't know that the moon reflects." No, that isn't the point. The point is that you are the sun. Your heart is the sun. That is an experience that you can only have personally, and you have to have some kind of backdrop to experience that. So when you got in the old mysteries, according to Steiner and according to the first class of the High School of Spiritual Science, this is something about the way that you would hear. And then I'm going to read This is the first, second, and third parts of the Tableau. All of these are public. And the third one is one that John put in the recent book on the Confronting Your Double, Knowing Your Double, and the Dweller of the Threshold, is Ex Deo Nocimer, In Christo Morimer, In Spiritus Sanctum Reviviscimus. Now, those three sayings may not mean anything to you, but once you understand what they mean, they are basically who you are. But how you feel when you get to the threshold is like this. Behold, I am the only gate to knowledge. O man, know thyself. Thus sounds the cosmic word. Solemn in thy soul thou hearest it. Mighty in spirit thou feelest it. Who speaks so powerfully through the world, who speaks so tenderly within thy heart, works it through the far spread rays of space into thy senses' experience, sounds it through the weaving waves of time into thy life's evolving stream. It is thou, O man, who to thyself, sensing in space, experiencing in time, this word dost beget, feeling thyself a stranger in the vast soul void of space, because the force of thought is webbing from thee in the destruction stream of time. Well, I'll stop there for this moment, because what does that just tell us? You're here to learn about yourself, and it's going to shock you. And not only that, you're going to know about the world, you're going to know about the gods, you're going to know that time doesn't exist, space doesn't exist, and consciousness is fleeting. That's what it prepares you for. So when you step across there, they call it the burning ground. They call it the abyss. They call it going down to the river, like the river Styx. They call it meeting the angel of the present. All these things actually happen to you at that moment when you're falling asleep or when you're dying, or when you're in a high state of meditation or transcendence or prayer. So when that happens, you don't have anything to relate that comes from the material world. So if you haven't worked on your virtuous development, if you haven't worked on your moral impulses, if you haven't worked on refining your thinking, feeling, and willing, you have nothing there when you're standing at the threshold. And so you are going to feel overwhelmed when you cross it over the threshold, just like modern humankind feels that because of the pressures of death that are impinging upon us. Everybody's facing death. And so what are you going to feel like when you're facing death? What are you going to feel like when you're going to sleep without a clear conscience? You don't want to be there. You want to work on all of this now. Now, how do you work on it now? By going to the third tableau. In the third tableau, John was so nice to put it in the book. I had not put it in the book. But it's absolutely pertinent. And I'm going to leave out the Latin. The Latin is Ex Deo Nocimer, In Christo Morimer, Per Spiritum Sanctum Reviviscimus. Now, this is what it means. I entered in this world of sense, bringing with me the heritage of thought. The power of a God hath led me here. From the divine springeth mankind. I esteem the Father. Death stands at the end of the way. I will to feel the being of Christ. He, in the death of matter, wakens birth of spirit. In Christ, death becomes life. I love the Son. Thus, in the Spirit shall I find the Word, and in the world becoming know myself. Through the Spirit, we come to life again. I unite with the Spirit. Ex Deo Nocimer, In Christo Morimer, Per Spiritum Sanctum Reviviscimus. And in the first class, there are actually gestures that go with that. There's the gesture of Michael that goes with that, and they treat this very solemnly. And when they say it, it's kind of like the prayer that you'd say, the Our Father before you sit down to do your nightly review of your conscience. It's like the holy prayer, but it's used in a variety of places. And so these same concepts you can find throughout all of anthroposophy. As a matter of fact, I'll give you one other from the first class, and it's this. In the end, they reveal the secret of the rainbow. Now, he tells us the secret of the rainbow in other places. But here, after you go through this whole thing with the first class and all these mantras and the 19 lessons, he then tells you that you should look at the rainbow upside down. It's the Holy Grail. And what's falling into it? Angels. And the light of angels are turning into the colors of the rainbow, but it's so tenuous. It's not really there. Remember, the rainbow is not really there. It's only there for the perspective of the person seeing it. And so basically it's showing you that the whole world is an illusion made by spiritual beings who we have misunderstood because we're upside down. We're backwards and we're inside out. If we could see it for what it was, we would realize with every sunrise, every sunset, every time we see the sun and everything that it does, these are the wondrous workings of the spiritual world from beyond the threshold. But we see them in material ways, which keep us from actually seeing what they truly are.
Well, I recall Rudolf Steiner responding to somebody asking him what a human being was, and he said, he made a comparison to the rainbow, that it's something that arises as a result of a convergence of different conditions. He says, and I'm paraphrasing, but he says that's basically what a human being is. And so, ex Deo nacimur, out of God we are born. In Christo morimur, in Christ we die. Per spiritum sanctum reviviscimus. Through the Holy Spirit we are redeemed.